But now we go to the last, but not, well, it was the least wins team of the league. The Jacksonville Jaguars, they were 3-14, had the number one overall pick. Gone is Urban Meyer, brought in Doug Peterson, a head coach. A few other departures they had was linebacker Miles Jack, guard Andrew Norwell, and wide receiver DJ Chark. But made a lot of moves addition-wise. Grabbed guard Brandon Scherf from the Washington Commanders, cornerback Darius Williams from the LA Rams, brought in wide receiver Zay Jones, brought in wide receiver Christian Kirk, which was a very highly talked about topic because of the contract they gave him. Tight end Evan Ingram, who's shown some flashes in New York. And then linebacker Foyesade Oluokun from the Falcons, who's been really good there. And then obviously in the draft, grabbed Trayvon Walker in the first round, who we both felt was 1 or 2. And then a linebacker I really liked, and Devin Lloyd later in the first round. And they made other picks too. But nonetheless, what are your expectations for year 2 of Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars?
I don't want to sound like I'm overselling the Jaguars because I do think there's going to be an improvement. And I think it could be a pretty big improvement. I'm not saying they're going to be a playoff team, but I would not be shocked to see if they were a 7, 8 win, maybe even 9 win team this year. And I say that because I think Trevor Lawrence could take a really big jump this year. I love the Doug Peterson hire, and not because I think that Doug Peterson's the best coach in the NFL or any of that kind of stuff, because I think that he's a very good coach, but I also think that the Super Bowl winning team was a combo of crazy good talent, but also a really loaded coaching staff. Like Frank Reich was amazing as their offensive coordinator. But I love Doug Peterson just because of the way that he views football and how that's going to impact this team. He's a guy who's always had a lot of great running backs. That's one of his staples, is that he's often had a really productive running back group. And so a team with first-round pick Travis Etienne, James Robinson, I think that those guys could have really good years for the Jaguars this year. And I think that's going to bode well for Trevor Lawrence, because if you have a really effective run game, that means that he doesn't have to do nearly as much this year. Also, their offensive line is pretty solid. I loved the fact that they once again went out and tried to build around Trevor Lawrence and this run game by bolstering the offensive line, by getting Brandon Scherf. He's one of the best guards in the NFL, has been for a very long time. Yeah, they had to pay a lot of money for him, but they got a lot of cap space, and they're not paying their quarterback yet in Trevor Lawrence, so you got the money to blow, so why not spend it? But on top of him, you already have Cam Robinson at left tackle. Jawan Taylor's a pretty solid tackle as well. So I like what they did with the offensive line to try and bolster it this offseason. I don't love the Christian Kirk signing in terms of how much money it costs them, but the wide receiver market has exploded, and the Jaguars are a team that are going to have to overpay to get a B-tier free agent because they're not contending for Super Bowls, and they haven't for a very long time, if ever. I mean, they had that one little stretch in 2017 where they were a legitimate Super Bowl contender, but even then, that was on the back of their defense, and a lot of those guys left because defense is hard to keep together. But they're going to have to overpay. So when they overpay for a guy like Christian Kirk, I think that is what caused the wide receiver market to inflate as much as he did, because at the time of his signing, I believe he was the 3rd highest paid receiver in the NFL. I might be wrong on that. In terms of a yearly basis, he was getting like $18 million a year. Since then, obviously, Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams have passed him. A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Keenan Allen.
I think McLaurin and DJ Moore also got contracts higher than Horn.
I feel like there's somebody else I'm missing out on. But there a bunch of guys have surpassed that contract this offseason after that. But I think a lot of the NFL was pretty mad about the Jaguars for doing that, because they did it really early in free agency, and all of a sudden you got all these young receivers like McLaurin, like DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, all those guys who we just named. They're negotiating contracts, and they're saying, well, if that guy can get that, I'm better than him, so I deserve more. And that's potentially what we just saw happen to the Titans, where they had to trade A.J. Brown because they didn't want to pay that super inflated deal, and the contract they were offering him was about the same as what Christian Kirk got. So he knows that his value is more, considering what the wide receiver market was at that point. But regardless, I think it was a solid signing, because in terms of talent, I think that he is better than any of the receivers they have on this team. I think that he could fit in really well because he's a solid deep threat, so he can help unlock Trevor Lawrence's arm. He's just got a veteran presence about him because he's been in the NFL for a long time. He's got to learn from DeAndre Hopkins, AJ Green, Larry Fitzgerald. He's had a lot of solid mentors who have been at the top, and so I'm not expecting him to, become this amazing elite number one receiver, but I think that he's going to be a solid addition for them. And then underrated addition, but Evan Ingram, the tight end, once again, just another option. He hasn't had the greatest career. He was a bit disappointing after all the hype that he had with the New York Giants, but I think that the athleticism he provides, once again, just I like that they're building around Trevor Lawrence and not being like the Chicago Bears, who we haven't covered yet, but we eventually will, and just sort of letting their year two quarterback just have to deal with what they already have. They're building around him. So I'm a big fan of the moves that the Jaguars made this offseason, and that's just the offense. I loved what they did on defense, too. Trayvon Walker, we both had him as one of our, I think, top 5 guys in our overall power rankings for the draft. He was our number 1 defensive end. Devin Lloyd, you had him as the number 1 linebacker in the draft. I had him as number 2, so we both thought he was a first-round guy. You get Alua Khan at linebacker as well, who I really like. So I love that they added a lot of athleticism to their team. That really is what stands out to me. Evan Ingram, incredibly fast. Zay Jones and Christian Kirk, they got size and speed. You got Trayvon Walker, who's an athletic freak. Alua Khan, who's also a pretty athletic freak at linebacker. Devin Lloyd, he can cover a lot of ground, a lot of great speed. So I feel like they went for a lot more of an athletic team, and I think that's going to bode well because they are a young squad with Lawrence, ETN, a lot of those guys. I think that these are a lot of solid building blocks that could elevate them, like I said, to a 7, 8, even maybe 9-win team. I think that's where their ceiling's probably going to be, but it all depends on the internal development of a lot of their young guys, and I'm excited for this year because I think that Doug Peterson could be a stabilizing force for them. And I don't think that, even in terms of talent, they were as bad as their record was last year because Urban Meyer just had a negative effect on the team as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. By the way, John and I don't ever talk about what we're gonna say, so I think it's interesting because I was about to say the same thing in terms of win expectancy. I think they're going to be a pain in the butt. You mentioned solid O-line. I think obviously a very good running back room with ETN and Robinson.
Also, just real quick, you saying they were pain in the butt. Like, we saw what they beat the Bills last year, I'm pretty sure. They beat the Colts at the end of the season. They beat good teams.
I mean, they've been picking in the top 10, top 5 basically for years. It's to be expected that they're going to have talent. It's just a matter of putting it all together. And like you mentioned with Doug Peterson, he's done it. He did it before in Philly. With Carson Wentz in that gang, and then we saw they're in the Super Bowl run. Even when their star quarterback went out, Nick Foles was able to step in, and the team looked good enough all around where it wasn't a crippling loss. That they were, as we saw, managed to get through the Super Bowl. Very good D-line, okay cornerback room in terms of that. So, once again, not saying they're going to make the playoffs, like John mentioned, but I think there's going to be a tough out for any team because, especially you mentioned defense, all the moves they made with the Trayvon Walker. He's going to get a lot of one-on-ones probably because, the edge rusher Josh Allen, as mentioned, who had a great game against the Bills last year. He's been doing really well. Then they also have first rounder Caleb on Chase on, who's going to be like the rotationary pass rusher guy, and they can move Trayvon Walker, inside on pass rushing downs. And then, you mentioned, Aluakun, really good linebacker. Then, maybe he can learn his thing. And then you have Devin Lloyd kind of behind him to learn. So, really love their moves. And the holes that they do have are, like we mentioned, pretty fixable. Like I mentioned, too, for the Texans, you need a star receiver. You could probably go trade for one next year. We know there's probably, I don't know who's up for contract, but who knows? You know what I mean? There may be a wide receiver that wants a new contract, wants out. Jaguars probably have the ammo to do that and pay that guy or get him via free agency or get him via the draft. So, and also Doug Peterson, the team that won the Super Bowl, Alshon Jeffrey was really good, but it was a good mix of a wide receiver room. It had Torrey Smith, his last good, he was like their deep threat. And then they brought out the best of Nelson Aguilar because he really hasn't been as good since. And then their tight ends too, which you can attribute some of that to Frank Reich, maybe like John mentioned. It'll be interesting to see, if Doug Peterson can kind of revitalize his just staff in that way because that offense was really good and knew how to use their personnel basically to their best because I remember Trey Burton was a guy I was grabbing like on random days in fantasy, and he would have like a touchdown or two. So we'll see what he can do with Jacksonville. Like we mentioned, pretty talented team, and obviously that organization has been trying to get out of the gutter for a while. So they did for that one moment, like John mentioned, 2017. Fortunately, had some issues they couldn't get past, but hopefully they can bounce back and be back in the conversation going forward. Get out of that AFC basement that they've been living in for a while. But that is Jacksonville Jaguars.